Try it again.
Hello, hello. Oh, now I can hear myself. Fantastic. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming to my presentation. The last day of the conference. I have a little trailer for you all to watch, so let's do that first.
Video, so you can get
Well, thank you very much. Again, thank you all for coming this morning. I am a last-minute addition to the conference roster. There was an opening, and I said, hey, if you have anything, I got a couple things to present, and this is the thing that they said I could present on, so here we go. This is use Intune like Nudge for iOS, and show of hands, who uses or knows what Nudge is? Awesome. How, show of hands, do you love it? Okay. So we are using Intune, we're going to be using Intune like Nudge for iOS, and it does not have to be your MDM. How is that possible? Well, my name is Millie Marsh, and I am an Apple device administrator at a grocery store. I bag groceries. And if you have any questions about this presentation, you can contact me on the Mac Admin Slack. I have previously done talks or been part of a panel at these different sessions. And here are some few fun facts about me. I rode a 260-mile bike ride with Girl Scouts back when I was in junior high. I was on a technology committee when I had my first IT job. I snuck into a keynote and bumped into Steve Jobs. I have family in Guatemala. I'm a seasoned traveler, and I like to crochet. So before we begin, this session is not about supervised device enrollment, BYOD user enrollment, using Intune as an MDM, or forcing an update onto a user's device. Now, those forced updates have been announced publicly for iOS 17 and macOS Sonoma, and we won't really be able to use those until those devices get to those operating systems. So what this session is about is conditional launch, app protection policies, nudging users to update their device, and reminding them of their responsibility. I'm a big proponent of giving autonomy to the end user. If you make the end user responsible for their own things, they're more likely to take care of them. When you force things on them, they're likely to come home and throw that iPhone up against the wall because they don't care and it's not their device. For those of you who don't know what Nudge is, it's a screen that pops up depending on the settings that you set. It reminds users to update macOS. It cannot force updates. All it does is annoys the user constantly. It guides users to software update when they finally click the button. It accepts configuration profiles if you use an MDM like Jamf. I don't know of the others that use configuration profiles. where a JSON schema is accepted. Admins set the minimum OS level and an install deadline. Now, I'll just say one note about the deadline. It's a deadline for Nudge to get more and more aggressive. It's not a deadline that impacts the user other than that. It doesn't do anything. It just keeps bugging the user. And it progressively, gets more annoying as the deadline approaches. And it does log user deferrals. So if the user hits, hide or minimize or tries to quit, it doesn't do any of those things. It ignores those things, but it logs them. So if you need a log, you can get an extension attribute to collect that information. Here's a QR code if anybody wants to download the slides and follow along. I will have this QR code at the end of the presentation. But this is our outline. We're going to go over some problems that we had updating iOS in our environment. Excuse me. We're going to go over some solutions, the user experience with conditional launch, and then we'll go through a live demo of implementing and creating a policy, and some caveats. So, any questions so far? Awesome. So, the old ways. No, we don't have any devices that are on iOS 7 or anything, but I thought it would be a fun slide picture to have in there. So, in our environment, security posture was decided in a vacuum. And we also had MDM vendor limitations. Primarily, we had a monolithic profile, which means that all of your settings are in one payload. Yes, thank you for shaking your head. It's evil and it's wrong. And so what happened was we had a production profile and we had a out of compliance profile, and it was decided that when a new update came out, users had 4 days to update. And then they got switched to this new profile. And this new profile was pretty impactful. We would have known about it, except that change management was not enforced. For those of you that don't have to deal with change management, it's basically you create a plan, you present the plan, you get approved for the plan, or you don't. None of that oversight was in place. There was no communication to support teams. So the experience was this. Big, ugly yellow screen. All the apps that the user had were hidden or removed. Users had 4 days to update their company device. Critical functions were blocked or hidden. Accessibility settings were blocked. Authenticator was removed. Wallet was removed. People were trapped at airports and couldn't call using their voice style, couldn't access their company cards. And worst of all, they couldn't do erase all contents and settings. On top of that, if a user managed to update their operating system, there was a 24-hour latency in reporting to the MDM, hey, I've complied, and then have all the settings restored. I went through the call logs for the support tickets. They were literally call after call after call, users being told, oh yeah, you have to wait 24 hours now before you can use your phone. That's unacceptable. And unfortunately, because of this, the inventory update wasn't 100% consistent. Moreover, we had no data protection on any BYOD devices. And by that definition, I mean users who configured their Outlook with company mail. We had no controls over those. So, high user impact meant large call volumes. We had last year 1,300 calls to the help desk that had to do with iPhones. And we have about 3,800 devices in our environment. The frequency of misrouted calls to wireless value-added reseller with problem with an iPhone was a majority of those calls. Those cost extra money because of the way that prices extra support, are calculated. The help desk lacked access to the MDM console. Whoops, and I lost my mic. There we go. So we had help desk people that couldn't even look up a device to see, hey, is your device, can it even support the new operating system? No KB articles for the user to update the OS. And there was a high rate of escalations to hire people who did have access to the console, and a very low rate of first call resolution, so a lot of headaches. So some solutions, we were tasked with finding some solutions. Now, mind you, I was on the Mac management team, but I also, anything Apple related, I'm like, hey, I'm here. So I sort of inserted myself into the situation because I wanted to be helpful. And we had some other people on the team that dealt with Intune, and we were all looking for solutions. And the first solution that we came up with was a short-term relief. We extended the grace period to 10 days, so people had a little more time. We shared the following KB article that lists all the security updates that Apple releases to all the support teams. And when we started auditing the MDM console for the OS update policies and the configuration profiles, there was some really crazy stuff in there. And then we started exploring solutions outside the box. Hiding in plain sight was Intune mobile app management. And I mean, really, because we use Intune for autopilot, and we have a great administrator on that side and a security guy, and they were the ones that found these very hidden settings. Now, I had just gone through Intune training because, hey, free training, right? And they didn't even cover this conditional launch thing that we're going to talk about. It is specifically data protection for licensed accounts. So if your users are using their Azure AD credentials to log into Outlook, Teams, Microsoft Word, and there goes my mic again, they are going to use, they will be under this policy. It works with supervised, BYOD, and unmanaged devices. And a little secret, if you don't have Nudge in place in your environment, you could probably use this for Mac OS as well, but I'll get to that at the very end. So improvements. We implemented app protection policy, iOS 16.3.1, so that was around January, February. The MAM app protection policies have been effective on these managed and unmanaged devices. And the user decides the best time to update their device. The significant change that happened was seen within 24 hours. Consistently, when we put the warn, when we put the change in place, when there's a new iOS update out, within 24 hours, 2/3 of our fleet has updated. 2/3 of our managed fleet has updated. No forced updates, no forced announced restarts. It just works because the user's in control. Some things that are noteworthy. Again, our devices are not using Intune. They are enrolled in MDM, the managed ones. We do not use software update deferrals, so if you do use software update deferrals, you need to ensure that when you make these changes, that you take those into consideration, because they'll get the warning, but they won't see the update because it's hidden because of the deferral you have in place. The organizational data in the app is protected when the block policy goes into effect. So that means if your Outlook app is configured with your Google personal account, your Apple personal account, and your organizational account. That organizational account sits in a completely separate space. And it's because Microsoft has developed an Intune SDK that they're leveraging to make that separation. Essential apps, settings, user preferences are untouched. And, you know, our company is achieving about 87% compliance on the managed fleet before the block is set. Also, super happy management people are excited that we've reduced our ticket count by 82% on the help desk. First call resolutions have not only increased, but there's a smaller number because the message on the screen is super clear. So here's the user experience. Before I go, any questions so far? Nothing. Okay. So this is the screen that they see when the policy is first set out. You'll launch your app and it'll say, applying your organizational protection policies. And then the app will close. And this is conditional launch. The app will quit and will need to be relaunched. The policies will be checked on app launch and periodically thereafter. So it is, and you can set how often that periodic check is. Then, oh no, your device doesn't have 16.3.1. So the conditions are checked on app launch. Examples of items that can be checked is iOS version, app version, device age, PIN age, whether it's jailbroken or not. For the purposes of this presentation, we're only focusing on the iOS version because it took our whole team about a month to go through all of the options and decide, okay, what's going to, you know, how fast or how slow do we want to implement this? How much impact do we want to show these users after this horrible experience that they've been having for years? So in this example, yeah, iOS version is required, and it's not met, so the warning is displayed. After about 10 days, we go back into Intune and we make a change. Unfortunately, this is not a set it and forget it setting. You do have to go in every time and change this. Please file feedback with Microsoft to make it set it and forget it, please. So app access is blocked. Now it says remove account or go back. Well, if you have another account that you need to access, you can remove your organizational account, do your business, and then update your operating system. And then, you know, when you log back in, you may have to re-sign into your organizational account. So the admin changes the Intune policy to block. In this example, iOS version is not met. The requirement isn't being met, so the access is blocked. The user is informed of the required action. And the user, again, can remove that enterprise account and continue to access the app. Finally, if you get to the point where it's past those 10 days and there's some critical information, or worse, you have users that have left the company, you can go in and remove their app data for whatever reason that your management or leadership tells you. The administrator changes the Intune policy to wipe data. Now again, it's not wiping the phone. It is only wiping the organizational data contained in those Microsoft apps that you have designated to be under these policies. The app remains installed. And this is sort of a diagram of how Microsoft has chosen to visualize this. The org data is protected with Intune app protection policies for Office 365 apps. You can also add other apps that are listed in the policy so long as they are leveraging the Intune SDK. Policies can be configured for any device, managed or unmanaged. Light touch policies equal great results, people. Anyways, any questions so far? Comments, bouts of outrage? Yes, sir.
Yeah, if you don't give me the box, you'll have to repeat the question.
Oh, yes.
My question is about what if somebody has more than one, say, institutional Microsoft 365 account?
You can
Then-
only have one institutional account signed in at a time. So if you have an Azure, you have Azure ID in your environment, you have that one organizational account can be signed in. You can add other accounts like Google, iCloud, Yahoo. I don't know if anybody uses Yahoo anymore.
I'm not sure if that's,
It's in the documentation, and there are links in the resources page.
maybe Intune wants it, I don't know, because I do have a couple of them on my phone for.
Right, but when you set the policy,
Okay.
it
so, okay.
only lets you do one at a time.
Yeah, you're limited to one managed, sorry.
It's my understanding you're limited to one managed one, basically. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay. So, how to. So here's some of the requirements. Microsoft Office 365 or Microsoft 365. They keep changing names. E3 or E5 license. I have nothing to do with licenses. This is just what I was told. Intune admin account. If your organization does RBAC, it would be best that they take the time to decide that this is only the area that you need to make these changes in. They've given me a full Intune admin account rights, and it's very scary for me because I don't want to accidentally, impact our autopilot environment. So use caution. And then discuss the roadmap. Discuss and plan a roadmap with the desired compliance settings. Every environment's different. People have different needs and wants. You may be working for an institution that has higher requirements, or you might have lower requirements. This includes grace periods, PIN requirements, other settings. And this is what the roadmap looked like for us. We took some time to discuss grace period, minimum OS. Again, mobile application management cannot detect deferrals. Don't over-configure. It's not conditional access. That is a huge other piece of information. This is not conditional access. This is conditional launch. Run your test scenarios. Use a managed phone, use an unmanaged phone. Test, and get your screenshots, and that way you know what's happening, and you can support your support teams before they escalate the call to you. Inform your end users. We had decided to just use a notification that pops up because, nobody reads their email. Well, we got pushback and we had to send emails now and a newsletter and get on a bullhorn, and that's fine. Communication is good. You can't ever over-communicate. But also write your KB articles, whether they're user-facing or support-facing. Those are great things to have. And then finally, set up reports, because that is going to make your department look great. And by your department, I mean all of the IT organization. It's going to make a case for, hey, we're doing something good for the company, we're saving the company money, we're keeping the company safe. It was just reported in the news this morning that the State Department's emails were hacked by the Chinese. This is serious stuff. Now, you might think, oh, my little organization, it's no big deal. It is a big deal because we have personal information in these accounts and information about our companies and our organizations. We need to make sure that we're being protected. Excuse me. So, here's a walkthrough of a first-time setup of conditional launch. And mind you, I set up these slides so that when you use them later after this talk, or if you're watching this online, you don't have to sit through the video and start and stop, start and stop, start and stop. You can just go through the slides, and I'm trying to cover exactly what I'm saying. So you're going to log into your Intune console, and you're going to go to App Protection Policies. And then you will go to Create Policy and select iOS, iPadOS. Now notice it does show Android, which means that yes, you could create a similar policy for Android devices, but we're not covering that because this is Mac admins. Sorry, my bias is showing. And so then, fill out the basics. Make sure that you write informative stuff here because you might move on to a new role. You might get promoted, and somebody else has to inherit this. Make it nice for them. So you'll hit next. And now we're number 2, apps. And core Microsoft apps are 11 apps. So I'm not going to name them all, but they are listed. These include Outlook, Teams, Microsoft Word, PowerPoint, etc. The item that says all apps is all apps that are leveraging the Intune SDK. So it's not all apps on the phone, it's just all apps that you can, have a look at that list. And it will show you here that as new apps are added to the core list, they'll be added to this item here. So keep track of your Intune updates. For the purposes of this presentation, we're going to mostly go with the default settings. We use different settings in our environment. No, I take this back. I lied. These are some of the settings that we did put in place. So we allow backups because in some cases we have people who have health data that they want backed up, and you can only do that using iTunes on your, or a backup on your computer. Or some people want to back up to iCloud with a managed Apple ID. And so you need that. And then, it better not be my phone.
No, it's mine.
Okay, thank you. And then you want to send org data to other apps. So this would be like you have an address in your calendar and you tap the address, you want it to go to Maps or Google Maps. If you don't set this up here, it won't send that data over there. But again, test. Your mileage may vary from mine. We block saving copies of org data. However, we do allow the backup or data to be copied to OneDrive and SharePoint. I would also maybe consider adding photo library, because if you have somebody who sends you a photo and you want to save that photo in your photos library, you'll need that box checked. Otherwise, you're going to have to do it on your computer. We allow third-party keyboards. We encrypt org data, which means you have other options that you'll have to set. The sync policy for managed app data is with native apps or add-ins. So that's basically the managed app data for this policy. This is not talking about MDM, managed apps. And of course, for those who still use evil printers, there's the ability to print. Again, your mileage will vary. We don't restrict web content, so if somebody has a link in their, hey, I've got the schedule link for the next session, you can open it with a browser. The app pin, when the pin is set, so you'll want to read through the documentation, but basically what this means is you're using the pin on the iPhone that's already been set by MDM for your MDM managed devices as the pin for the app. You're not creating a separate pin for the app because that's a pain in the behind to have two separate pins every time you open your email, every time you open your Teams. This addresses that. Now, for unmanaged devices, if that unmanaged device doesn't have a PIN, guess what? They need a PIN because you want that data to be encrypted. And if they don't want to put a PIN, well, they don't get access to company email. And then you want to recheck the access requirements. And the default is 30 minutes. So maybe they set the PIN, they get access, they go back, remove the PIN because they think they're being sneaky. 30 minutes later, it's going to request the PIN again when they access that app. Yeah. So this is the part that we really want. So it's going to summarize these, pre-fill these items here that we have already configured. And this is the piece that we want. The jailbroken piece is filled out by default. And then you want 2 minimum OS settings, one for block and one for launch. And typically what we do is, let's say we're all on 16.5 and oh no, 16.5.1 came out. Well, we currently block 16.5 from being launched. If you're not on 16.5, you don't get it. You don't get to go in and you get that block message. But 16.5.1 just dropped. Okay, great. I gotta go warn people. And so I'm going to change that to 16.5.1. After 10 days, both block and warn will say 16.5.1. And yes, it means I have to go in twice. Once when we, get CAB approval to set the warning in place, and once when we put the block in place. If you want to delete the policy, you just tap the 3 dots and tap delete. And this is something new since we started implementing this. Apparently, it also supports rapid security response. So if your organization is an organization that wants to roll out or require rapid security response, apparently it's supported. Now, I have not tested this. So please go forth and test. Report back. Let us know how it goes for you. We're not implementing RSRs yet because our security teams haven't asked us to yet. But when they do, we will definitely be ready with our test results on this front. Because this is a test console, I don't have any groups created, but typically what you would do here is you would add all your groups. If you organize your groups by licensed users, not Intune people or Intune devices, but licensed Azure AD users or Entra ID users, that's what you want to list here. And then it gives you a nice summary that you can print out and put into your change request if you really need to. So now I'm going to go into my demo. Any questions so far? No, awesome, okay. Ooh, there we go. So I need glasses. All right. So this is my, yes, question? Oh, okay. do that over here. And it's super tiny. Can everybody see that? Thank you for being patient, everyone. Nope, that didn't do anything.
I think if you just enlarge the text in the browser, that will be okay.
That better? Can people see? Awesome. So when you log in, you're going to go here to this sidebar called Apps. And you're going to skip Platform, and you're going to go down here to Policy. And you're going to click on App Protection Policies. And then you're going to click here where it says Create Policy. And you're going to click iPad iOS. I have written every single tooltip and default setting on a Word document that's also on that GitHub site that the QR code points to. So if you all need that as guidance, you can go there too and look at that. So we're going to type here a meaningful name, iOS, iPad OS, conditional launch OS requirement, something like that. This is a demo. And we're gonna click next. Now, I want you to notice that the numbers are not on the side, like in my slide. They're sideways, which means that whoever designed the site made it iPhone friendly. But I'm not gonna squish it because we have this big screen. Target the policy to, we want core Microsoft apps. Now, if I wanna see that list, it's gonna show me the list here. If I don't want Microsoft apps, let's say I want all Microsoft apps, that list gets a lot bigger. Now, maybe some of you don't use all these apps. That's okay. And then finally, the all apps, these are all apps that are using the Intune SDK. You got Adobe Acrobat Reader, you've got BlueJeans, you've got Box, Cisco Jabber for Intune. Who uses that? Cortana. But you can see that there's quite a number of apps in here. An app that's not in here, will probably never make it, is mail.app, the native Apple apps, but we'll get to that later. So we're gonna set this to core Microsoft apps. We'll click next. And then here, we're going to allow, whoops, sorry about that. And we're going to go to policy managed apps with OS sharing. And the reason we want that is so that apps interact properly with other apps. Okay, I'm still here. We want to block copies of org data, but we want to allow for OneDrive and SharePoint. We don't want to restrict cut, copy, and paste unless your organization really needs it. Third-party keyboards, sure. Encrypt org data, yes. Typically, I like to leave default settings as much as possible and then dial them in as needed. But if you already know what your org needs, then you can go from there. I don't restrict the web content to a specific browser because we've got Safari, we've got Chrome. People like their browsers as they do. And we'll click next. And then for PIN access, we'll require it. Now this one's a little tricky because you want to not show a full keyboard for the PIN. You want the numeric PIN. And a simple PIN, if you block it, which I recommend that you do, a simple PIN is a string of consecutive or repetitive digits. 1, 2, 3, 4. A, B, C, D. We don't want those. So we block it. So that forces the user to pick a PIN that is not a simple PIN. I personally like a 6-digit PIN, but the default is 4. And we want to allow Touch ID instead of the PIN, because on iOS, you have to have a PIN if your device is managed, and you have to have a PIN if you're going to use Touch ID or Face ID. Because after, I think it's 48 hours, it's going to ask you for your PIN anyways. So we allow that. We don't have the PIN reset after a number of days, but your results may vary. And this is the one that we also don't require. We do not require an app PIN when the device PIN is set, because that's just nonsense. So not required. We also don't require work or school account credentials for access, because they're already doing it. So you're not going to have them log in twice. And then recheck the access every 30 minutes. That's the default. So here are the defaults, the stuff that it's already taken. And then here's where you set your conditional launch. So we're going to do Max OS. What's the current OS that we're on right now? I forget. Thank you. 16.4 is going to be our block access. And then our minimum. I always get this mixed up, so I have to go through and read it to myself again. And we want to warn. Right. Does that make sense? Or did I flip it?
I think the first one's minimum.
Yeah, you want to.
Oh, you're right. See, this is why I ask. Come on.
Maybe delete it first.
You're right. See, and this is why we showed the delete button. So we'll do it again. Minimum. 16.4. And block. And minimum. See, I did it again.
Oh, that's right.
Maximum. Y'all keeping me honest here? Right. Does that make sense? They're both minimum. No, one is
Well,
1 minute, one is min, and one is max.
do you want to?
Oh, no, you're right. No, you're right. Sorry, guys and gals. The difference is the warning. Again, this is why you want to test. Because now when I do my change controls, all I'm doing is going in here and literally changing numbers. There we go. So minimum OS block, minimum OS warn.
The minimum OS of 16.4 is going to include 16.4.
Okay,
Leave the box and it back.
would you mind taking the box?
Where was that?
No, I appreciate the questions.
So wouldn't your minimum OS version of 16.4 include 16.4.1?
No. So if you have a user who is on 16.4, let's take it a step back. You have a user who's got an old phone that's running version 15 something. They will be blocked they won't be able to log into their mail on that phone because the minimum OS is 16.4 and higher. It's blocked. They're blocked at 16.4 and lower. Did you have a question?
I think maybe I can clarify it. You got it. So if I understand this correctly, the first rule, minimum OS 16.4, means that the device must be at least at 16.4?
Yes.
Or else it will be blocked?
Correct.
And then if it must be at least 16.4.1, or else they will get a warning that
Correct.
they will need to update the device?
Correct.
So with this rule, anybody who's on 16.3 would be blocked.
Yes.
If they're at 16.4, they would get a warning.
They would get a warning
And then if
because
they're
they're not at 16.4.1.
Okay, so if they're on 16.5 or 16.5.1, they're not going to see this at all?
No.
Okay.
We don't have a max OS.
You're
If
not
you-
going to block somebody from running Sonoma if you...
Correct.
Okay.
Well, Sonoma, if they can put it on
Not
their
Sonoma,
phone, that'd be
iOS
awesome.
17. Yeah, iOS Sonoma. No, iOS 17.
Does this make sense?
Yeah.
I know the logic is a little infuriating,
Just
but
blame Microsoft.
but when you do your testing, you will see that, oh, okay, I'm on the operating system that needs the update. I'm being warned. Oh, I'm not on an operating system that meets the block access number, then you have to at least get to that level.
Hey, I have a quick question back here as
Yes.
well. Do you know if, so my organization already uses MAM for access policies. Should we just add a conditional launch to
Yeah.
one of those, or are you able to branch it off? and
Oh, you
do
can
a
make
bunch?
as many policies as you want. And honestly, I would recommend that if you have already a policy in place that is checking for PIN, checking for this and that and the other, create a policy that looks just like it and add just your test devices so that you can test this out and get your screenshots for your documentation. And then once you're ready, you can go back to your production policies and add the conditional launch line items. Does that make sense?
Perfect, thank you.
Awesome. Any other questions, concerns, bouts of outrage? Okay. All right. And again, this is my test instance, so I don't have any groups, but typically you would want to add your licensed users, not your devices, because if you don't use MDM or Intune as your MDM, then you're not going to have any of those items there. You want your licensed users. And you click launch. I'm sorry, you clicked review. And here you can look at all of this. These are all the defaults. I don't mess around with any of that stuff. It works. Not too concerned about it. And up here, when you're done with this, you click create. It's creating the policy. Hooray, now you have this policy. And you can stretch this out and read that there. You can export this if you want to. But you can also go back in here and you can delete your policy. You can see your numbers. You can have a look at the properties, and this is where you would go in and scroll all the way down to conditional launch edit. So this is where you would add, wherever you add your conditional launch, this is where you would adjust this. You click edit, you go in here, and guess what? Now we're gonna block at 16.4.1. See? The person who had the question about the two versions. So here what we're doing is we're editing because our 10 days have gone by, and so now our warn and our block are gonna both be at 16.4.1. And we're gonna review and save. and save, and that's it. It takes longer for me to file the change request than it takes me to make the change in here. And this it takes, has an immediate effect. It just goes, so be careful. Any questions, concerns before I move out of the live demo? Bucks?
So right before you came into the properties, it said it's not deployed.
Right, because I don't have any
Any
users
devices to deploy.
in my
Okay,
group.
so if you had selected users, then it would automatically deploy.
Right.
You don't have to do anything else.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, no problem. And I apologize, I can't share like my actual live environment for information reasons. Any other questions, concerns? Show of hands, is this useful to you?
Yes,
Awesome.
we're already doing this, so just helpful to see.
Awesome. Oh, another question.
I was just gonna ask, does this download like a profile or anything to the device?
It is not downloading a profile to the device because it is not device management. It is app protection management. So it is leveraging an Intune SDK. I don't do software programming or app development, but my understanding based on the documentation, I have links in the presentation that describe what's being done at that level. When I presented this, which I'll get to into the next part of my presentation, when I spoke to Apple about this, they called this Intune SDK their secret sauce, Microsoft's secret sauce. I'm like, okay. I'm going to show you the form real quick since I have it up here. So I created this little form. Can you move it over? No. Doot. There we go. So this form will be on the GitHub site. So it's like a brief description, a couple links. This is some screenshots. A list of the apps for the core apps. And then a table of all the default values on all the descriptions. So you don't have to, if you don't have access to Intune, hey, at least now you have it here. I'm seeing some oohs and ahs. That makes me happy. So, yeah. So this will be on the GitHub side. Let's go back to the keynote. So, the effect of Intune warn and block notifications. This graph shows iOS version installed across our managed fleet. This is the only data that we were able to take metrics on. The unmanaged devices, I'm still trying to figure out how to get that info out of Intune console, but whatever. This gave us a good smell test, if you will. There was a 0 day for 16.3.1. We put the warning in place, and from February 13th to the 15th, so by the 15th, so it's 2 days, we had 2,982 out of 3,800 devices patched. That's unheard of for us, and for most organizations, I think, because, you know, hey, update your iOS, yeah, whatever. And then 16.4 dropped, and those are our numbers. I mean, does anybody, show of hands, do you think this is impressive?
It's definitely effective.
It's awesome. So yeah, this is just the warn after 1 day. We did a block after 10 calendar days. But here's the gap. Mail app users, we can't affect these notifications on. There's nothing in place in Apple's deployment platform that allows us to leverage MDM for any MDM vendor to show a warning or a message or a something that says, hey, male app user, your app needs to be, or your operating system needs to be updated. Now you might talk to Apple and they might tell you, well, you can force software updates. Well, my organization doesn't want me to do that. I need options as an administrator, just like the user gets options to do what they want to do. The average gap of devices for our organization is about 500. Active Sync is still being managed by MDM, which prompts users for their credentials, so that's also impactful. And I'll say this, this last mile, I'm not asking for Apple to leverage Intune's SDK, but that's why the warning doesn't show up or the block doesn't show up. Some will tell you, well, you just need to use Microsoft Device Compliance for BYOD. Okay, you can also do that for company devices, but if your organization is structured in such a way that device compliance is out of your realm of access, in our case, it's access management that has control over that, I don't want them to have that level of control because sometimes it's overly stringent when it doesn't need to be necessarily. Sometimes you don't want to travel with your laptop across the country because that's the only device that is configured with device compliance. So those are things that if you're part of Appleseed for IT and you feel so inclined to write a feedback, let Apple know. Like I said, the dependencies lay outside of the Apple's subject matter expertise area of responsibility. It's usually the Microsoft Intune admin or the Microsoft device compliance person or cybersecurity. So yeah, getting to 100% is how can Apple help us? We need focused software updates. So forced software updates should be a last resort, in my opinion. These are my opinions, not the opinions of my employer. Apple device admins need options. Provide an MDM method to display notifications similar to Microsoft. Messaging about why organization accounts can't be set up in mail. So maybe they don't want to give us a warning. Maybe they can give us something that says, hey, your organization has blocked your ability to configure a company account in mail. Go use Outlook. Maybe that's an option that they can provide us. In writing feedbacks on the Apple, on the feedback assistant side of things, I'm not looking to tell them how I want them to solve my problem. I'm looking to tell them my story and tell them this is our challenge and we need your help to fix this challenge through MDM, not through some third-party SDK. And maybe they might see that, oh, there's a need here. If you single out things like accessibility, privacy, security, that gets their attention. And that gets you a higher priority when you send in feedbacks. Ask me how I know. Don't ask me how I know. Yeah, file feedback. So here's a list of resources. Some of the links of the talks that I mentioned at the beginning. The Microsoft links under resources on the right, apps you can manage with app protection policies and other items. The multi-identity question, Amit, is listed there. Special thanks to Eric Gomez, who created Nudge. And in that trailer that you saw at the beginning, there was a little Easter egg. He actually coded Nudge to work in Vision OS. Can you imagine that getting nudged in Vision OS? Colleague of mine, SB on Mac Admin Slack, she's a project manager. She's an amazing person. Walked through this presentation with her, and she's like, she didn't really understand. She thought, wait, you're gonna block all access to my account on my email? I said, no, just on your device. And she's like, oh, you need to clear that up because I thought you were gonna block my whole email. And I'm like, no. Brad T. Chapman, who helped put a lot of the finishing touches on this presentation. There's the QR code again, if anybody needs it. Any questions, discussion? We got 15 minutes left. I hope this was helpful, and I hope it was engaging, and I hope it didn't make anybody nod or go to sleep. Yes?
Okay, so you put this in place, and then even on like a personal device, it'll, if they're signed in, it'll either warn them or block them.
Yep.
Do you get a lot of complaints about that on their personal device, or is it, you just have to make sure users are aware and informed?
So our call volume because I took the stats, our call volume total last year for iPhone-related issues, and it was typically all the peaks matched iOS updates 4 days later, it was about 1,300 calls. This year so far, we've had 300 calls. 300, and we're only halfway through the year. Most of those calls have been, my iPhone's too old, what's this, is this spam?
Yeah.
Some other feedback that we could perhaps send to Microsoft is give us a space in that warning to put a link so we can have the user go to a KB article. But they'll just call it's first time call resolution, all those 300 calls, all first time call resolutions.
Okay.
So, and it's typically, what is this? Go press software update and update your stuff. and it's done. So does that answer your question?
Just in complete normal fashion, you need to inform your users.
Absolutely. I mean, there will always be users that, you've thrown the spaghetti on the wall and they don't understand that you've thrown spaghetti on the wall. Some people don't read email, but I typically, when new things like this come out, I also try to engage HR and have it included as part of onboarding, because that's when the new people will go, well, this is how we're supposed to do it. And the people that have been there a while are like, oh, what are you doing? Oh, we had this in training. Oh, we didn't get that training. Oh, yes, you did. It's right here in the company newsletter. They're like, oh, okay. So, any other questions? Another question. Hooray. We like questions.
So you indicated in your title that if it's not your MDM, you can still use Intune. So I was thinking, well, I had a couple questions. One, what is your MDM?
Unfortunately, for our iOS devices, we use Mass 360.
Okay. So you can have two MDMs, have it enrolled in two MDMs to push out two different policies. So you have.
So Intune is not being leveraged as an MDM in this case. It is being leveraged, what's being leveraged is something called Mobile Application Management. And under that is App Protection Policies. And under that is Conditional Launch.
Gotcha. So basically, you're making sure you don't have the same policies being pushed down from both your enrolled MDMs. I guess technically you're enrolled in both, right?
We don't have any devices enrolled in Intune. We get Intune for free because we're an Azure shop.
Right, I understand that. It seemed like you said in the beginning that your iPads were enrolled in Intune.
No.
So that you could push the policies down. Well, how do you get the policies to push down from Intune on your devices then?
So Intune app protection policies are using the Intune SDK on all of those Microsoft apps. So when those Microsoft apps launch, they are checking those app protection policies because they're signing in with an Azure AD account.
You're pushing them out to users, not devices.
Correct. They're being pushed out to users, not devices. Does that make sense?
Sort of, but I mean, so the policies are user-based policies, not device policies?
Correct. And it's not MDM.
Okay. Okay. I was just trying to get the high levels, like,
Right,
okay,
so
you have
Azure-
all these iPad devices you're tracking.
We're not tracking any device in Intune. We're tracking our devices. Our devices are in Mass 360, and we also use Jamf for our Macs. If you dig into the documentation, there's also a conditional launch policy that you can set for Macs if you want to. But that's out of the scope of this presentation.
It's just confusing, because when you have your graphs on how many devices that have each version of the OS, it's like, how is that not tracking the devices? It's tracking users, so it's like kind of confusing.
So the way we were tracking this is I was literally pulling a report from our MDM, which is Mass 360.
Oh, okay.
And that's how I was tracking that. Question?
Hi, so I leverage this already, and I also enroll my devices in Intune. So you can do both or none. So like a scenario where you just use MAM with no enrollment would be like a BYOD device, and they want to use Word, Excel, PowerPoint, OneNote, OneDrive, and they need access to those items, but they don't want to enroll. So, you know, conditional access does come into play if someone's managing that and they say that in order to access OneDrive, for example, you need to be compliant. That then assumes that the device is enrolled. So that policy would need to be maybe excluded from a certain subset of users that are BYOD. Those BYOD users then could basically install the apps. As soon as they hit their organizational account and sign in, little thing pops up and says that your organization requires these policies for your device. And then at that point, the enforcement of versions of the OS come into play, because it says to use this app and account, you need to be a certain version.
Right.
And there's no association to device enrollment. It's
Right.
just the app essentially is acting as an agent.
Right.
If
And
we wanna-
yeah, that's what he said. The app is acting as an agent. We are not using user enrollment for BYOD, for all these unmanaged devices. They're not even enrolled. They're not managed. They don't have a profile. These are folks that sometimes will have two phones because they're like, well, I'm going to use my Outlook on my personal phone and on my company phone. Well, guess what? Your personal phone is now going to have app protection policies because we want to protect the organizational data in there. And so you're using your company account to log in. You are a licensed user. Guess what? You get that app protection policy applied to your device for that portion of Outlook that has organizational data on it. Does that make sense? Awesome.
Just one more. And then one thing about like enrollment versus MAM, and like maybe I can use one or the other. The real reason why we like have to use both, it comes down to like the need for network access and device certificate delivery. Like if you have to deliver a certificate to the device, you're still kind of locked into needing to enroll the device. You can't do that through MAM. MAM is really good for like a light touch user, maybe a salesperson who doesn't need access to any sort of internal resources,
Right.
in my opinion. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you. I appreciate your knowledge on Intune.
Do you get any pushback on the personal devices from a jurisdictional point of view? Like, this is my device, you can't require me to update to a certain version. How do you handle that?
We tell them you can use your personal, you don't want this policy on your personal device. You have a company device you can access your email on.
Or they can just choose to remove the company account from their personal device.
Right, which is basically the same thing.
Expectations.
So,
Yeah.
This is why communication and planning your rollout is so important. You want to make sure you have buy-in from leadership. You want to show them that, look, we're going to reduce the call volume and save X amount of dollars or whatever it is that gets them going in the morning. You want to make sure that you have clear and straightforward user communication that says, when you see this, do this. Don't overcomplicate it. And yeah, if they don't want to update, we had people in our test group didn't want to put a pin on their phone. Who doesn't want to put a pin on their phone? What are you doing? Yes, sir.
A quick follow-up on the personal devices. Have you found that when applying these conditional access settings, an unspoken prerequisite is also having Microsoft Authenticator installed for the user to gain access?
So Microsoft Authenticator is not part of the core list or any of those. They're not leveraging the Intune SDK for Microsoft Authenticator. So you're clear on that one.
Okay, because we've run into an issue where on personal devices, when we have these applied on our company phones, the personal device, when they try to log in with the account, is blocked access. They get an access block until they have Authenticator installed.
Yeah.
You have a conditional access overarch somewhere, and you need to audit all your conditional access policies. It's something that's intriguing.
Do you want to repeat what he said?
Yeah.
It needs to be excluded, initially we had an overarch.
I'm sorry.
To affect everything.
Mark,
and you need to
Max.
figure out how to.
Do you mind repeating that?
Yeah.
Thank you.
You probably have a conditional access conflict somewhere, and so if that's not your purview, you may need to work with whoever authored it and see you may need to limit where that's being extended to, because in our case, it was everybody who uses this has to be compliant and has to have MFA. So that's everyone, but you could exclude it to BYD users or something, right? And then let's create a new conditional access policy for them that says you don't need those things, and that should take care of the block.
So when you create your roadmap and you do your planning, you want to highlight, if you have different groups that have different levels of access, you want to highlight those, because with a policy like this, you may only want a certain part of your population included in this policy. But I cannot emphasize enough, test. And if you are having those sort of race condition situations, create a completely separate policy to make sure the conditional access conditional launch is working. And then add the other stuff, ingredient per ingredient at a time. We have 3 minutes left. Are there any other? This has been.
It's also platform specific, your conditional access policies. It gets really granular, so if you don't realize that, you may have done iOS and Android, but not Windows and Mac, or vice versa, and then maybe certain users in that subset or not certain users. So, yeah.
You need to do a talk on Intune next year.
Yes.
If you successfully use
Well, thank you everybody for coming to my talk. I really appreciate your attendance. I'm glad I could be helpful, and have a great rest of your day and weekend.